When we can't call a spade, like thugs rioting and looting, rioters and looters, then we know that our language and thinking is broken. If a single person looks at this image of Abraham Lincoln and still believes that Black Lives Matter is an honest movement for racial equality, or, as the case should be, an end to any kind of racial categorization at all, then they prove that language and thought in our societies are broken. The question, then, is why is it that we can't call a spade a spade? So far in this series, we've seen how left-liberalism controls current language and thought, and how a simple revision of this using the facts would quickly topple the left-liberals' hegemony, if people would simply take those facts with them into the institutions of Western countries. The rot is very much within the institutions, although we constantly hear from the tiny minority of left-liberals who scream and perform violent acts upon the street. They are really just used as proof that the institutions must act thus because of the people. This is certainly true in the UK, where quite literally every institution of the country, from the universities, to the civil service, to the police, even the Church of England, are run by left-liberals and left-liberal language and thought. But the fragmentary, contradictory, even paradoxical nature of left-liberalism and the left-liberals is fundamental to their existence, and has even evolved into the natural operational state of the class, because the class itself is made up of many different groups, many of whom are either born of postmodernism or have imbibed of it, and as such they're still relatively new and unset groups. Nevertheless, what they share is a general acknowledgement of what they are against, and a language and nihilistic/millennial way of thought. As such, this motley collection of groups is very effective at coming together against its perceived opponents, but may or may not cooperate in pursuing their individual niches. The effect of this is a general decline in culture and politics, as much of what was achieved in the past is routinely opposed by the left-liberals, but nothing particularly stable or useful is established. And in part, this is because none of the niches have yet to establish total dominance and are, in their own way, engaged in an internal class struggle for dominance. For example, the gay lobby, the Muslim lobby, the environmental lobby, and the race lobby are all part of the broader left-liberal class, and they will work together against their enemies, but none has dominance. We, in the West, don't live in a caliphate, or a green totalitarian state, for example, as would be the case if either the Muslim or environmental lobby gained eminence. For society, then, the problem isn't that any of these groups has enough power on their own, but that there is a culture, now, that is willing to prostrate itself whenever any of these groups proclaims, and then capitulates. This has been seen, for example, in the dismantling of the traditional structures of state in the United Kingdom, occurring whilst the state itself has fragmented, with contradictory new courts, warring devolved governments, and overmighty backbench MPs, the Speaker of the Commons, and civil servants. The outcome, thus, is a power vacuum in which left-liberalism has flourished, but also within which the left-liberal class, in its myriad forms, is now warring. All of this leads one to ask the question proposed in the title of this video. Is left-liberalism really a thing, given that it is made up of so many contradictory or diverse elements? Or is it just a bogeyman, as the left-liberals say? We will look more deeply into the reasons why left-liberalism is inherently fragmentary and even paradoxical in a later video. For the moment, it is enough to know that the left, as an ideology, has always been a negative one, which is to say, it knows very strongly what it is against, but it is very blurry about what it wants. Such is the reason for its radical, irrational hatred of all things Western, whilst no truly socialist and certainly no communist state has ever succeeded, let alone matched up to the utopian propositions of the left. Negative ideologies like the left are virtually doomed to become contradictory, and even irrational in their arguments, because they end up opposing whatever they consider themselves to be against, even if that thing is good, or, as in the case of homosexuality versus Islam, requires a standpoint outside of the ideology. And as for the capital L liberals, it is critical to remember that capital L liberalism is a creation of the bourgeoisie, which, for example in England, was the ideology of choice to oppose the capital C conservatives, or Tories. As such, the values of this ideology are, in the end, about money, and the power that it, and a system devoted to it, brings. Clearly, such a set of values are prone to contradiction and lack of logic, in that two contradictory services or products or marketing stances can be profitable. Left liberalism is able to thrive, therefore, because contradictions within it are not simply tolerated, but inherent to its birth, and in practice, this takes the form of the left liberals, who place no value in facts or logical reasoning, and thus don't even care about the contradictions within their ideology. Left liberals, then, do not operate as a monolith. Ideology as a pervasive force has always been a more powerful, if nuanced, way of taking over and controlling a society. In such a society, there is no central organisation or building to point to and criticise, and, perhaps worse, the effect of the ideology is to create a zeitgeist within which the people of the society live. This makes it very difficult to even perceive the ideology without external intervention. For example, the average medieval European would have considered themselves to live in a Christian world, and the medieval period in Europe is nominally said to be one governed by the overarching ideology of Christianity. It was called Christendom, wars of Christendom were launched against the Islamic caliphates, Bibles of very similar content could be found all across Europe, and so forth. And yet, was medieval Europe really governed according to Christianity? In the sense that medieval Christianity is literally what Christianity evolved into, then yes. But as far as Christianity itself, as presented by Jesus, and even the later constructive Bible goes, then no. The medieval period was governed by a syncretism of Christian language, Roman institutionalization, and barbarian tribal politics, which evolved into feudalism. Similarly, today, Western society is not truly governed by the principles of small l liberalism, a combination of liberty, capitalism, and the institutional inheritance of English political stability and rationality, but instead by a syncretization of left-wing language, capital L liberal ideological corporatism, and that same Roman institutionalism simply evolved into modern-day Europeanism. If this all sounds very academic, it is because of the deeply needed revision in history that I spoke of in the prior video, because all that I am describing is the historical development of the left and capital L liberalism that has led to the contemporary situation. But currently, the zeitgeist that left liberalism has on our society makes all of this information appear deeply academic. This overwhelming effect that the facts have brings me nicely back to the original question. The reason that the ideology of left liberalism can be used to debunk itself, which might sound paradoxical, is because, as we've seen, left liberalism itself is paradoxical. And this is because instead of using facts or logic to establish its premises, it simply clings to its original tenets and dogma, much of which is deeply buried within its genetics. The result of this is an endless stream of opinion from the left liberals that washes over opponents, drowning them in a miasma of convoluted and dispersed arguments that are impossible to counter because of their mass and the way they are a tangled web. One very obvious example of this is the succession of different victim groups in recent years that has allowed left liberalism to push forth its agenda, from women to black people to gay people to Muslims to trans people and currently back to black people. Arguing the minutiae of Islam or transgenderism or race in any of these cases is actually pointless, because the left liberals aren't making a logical, sincere case for them, but simply using them for their ends as each becomes opportune. Hence you can see that the paradoxical nature of left liberalism is in fact one of its primary defences. By being paradoxical, when viewed as an entire collective argument or ideology, they effectively mask what they are doing. For example, there is not much that would appear to link the Ayatollahs of Iran, the Chinese Communist Party, the fascist Argentine juntas, the Irish Republican Army, the USSR, Hezbollah, and Black Lives Matter. And yet what links them is the support and friendship of the former UK Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn. And the reason for this is that they are all, in varying degrees, opponents and even hostile enemies of the West, and the UK in particular. You can see therefore that arguing the particulars of any one of these groups would be a pointless endeavour, because what Corbyn likes about them is their inherent opposition to the West, or UK, and that, for him, as many left liberals, is an article of faith. It is an especially nefarious trick because it plays on the general acceptance and understanding of British people that one's politicians are working for them, at least as a people, as a country, and that rational argument based upon the facts is what we all hold as our benchmark and the standard by which politics should be discussed. Left liberalism, or this trick, is presented as a challenge to call the left liberals irrational or underhanded. This was seen during the Brexit negotiations. Despite the vast majority of the establishment being left liberal and actively conspiring against the UK with the EU in the negotiations, the mere hint of any Brexiteer mentioning this was immediately condemned as hateful smearing designed to use jingoistic language to crush the voice of Remainers. This challenge therefore plays on the British public's better nature. It states that the mere suggestion that the left liberals are being irrational, or illogical, or even acting treacherously, is proof that they are not, and that no such ideology as left liberalism exists, because we all agree that it is good to be rational and logical and to do what's best for the people. They are asserting that no person would be willingly irrational or illogical, and therefore left liberalism does not exist, because no such obviously flawed ideology would exist. It is very clever, even if by accident. They effectively take up the challenge that the facets of left liberalism are illogical and wrong, and they agree with this. And by doing so, they assert that therefore no such thing does exist, because nobody would be willingly illogical or wrong. That may or may not be true, but of course, if your values are not about fact or empiricism, but are left-wing or capital L liberal, then they would. Negative ideologies are seen in the negative. Just as an astronomer might identify a black hole by the absence of light, that is data, rather than a positive input of light, the data, so too left liberalism crystallizes in its multiplicity of opposition to anything regarded as traditionally Western or right-wing, even if today this is warped into such a nihilistic ideology that this also includes Jews, feminists, and even Chinese people. It used to be said that the devil enjoys the fact that people don't believe in him, since it means he can do his evil business all the more easily and without resistance. In the case of the left liberals, their hope is that people can't accept that they exist, because no group of people could be so flagrantly stupid against the facts or logic. Of course, if one does wish to read history, there are certainly many people throughout it who were committed to power, or wealth, or dogma, rather than the facts. There is no evidence for a monolithic left-liberal organisation that hides its puppeteering masterfully behind a charade of contradictory action, and much of the effect that left-liberals have upon society occurs because the class is acting as one without coordination, but simply because they all abide by an approximation of the same ideology. The result of this is a net effect. Nevertheless, the ruthlessness and speed with which the left liberals come to each other's aid and attack any non-left liberal entities gives away their existence and indeed their motivations and self-awareness. Because just like the black hole, one might not be able to see them, but one can see the effect that they have upon what is around them, just like the bending of light.